They left her standing at the altar, wedding dress and all, the whole town watching. It wasn't an accident. It was a decision made in the sacristy minutes before, between a weak son and a mother who had never wanted her. Isabella took the first horse she found and rode without knowing where. The only place that came to mind was her dead grandmother's house, the one place in the world where no one would judge her. She arrived in tears, walked into the dark, fell asleep on the dirt floor, and that night had a dream that would change everything. Since dawn, the Montoya house had been full of the ordered commotion that precedes a big celebration. The smell of copal and fresh-cut flowers, neighbors fussing over the dress, the madrina adjusting the veil, Isabella's mother crying with happiness in a corner of the kitchen, stirring the atole long after it needed stirring. Isabella was 23 and had spent 2 years engaged to Gerardo Villanueva. 2 years of waiting, with the patience of someone who believes that anything worth having is worth the time it costs. Gerardo was a good man, or so she believed. A man of work and few words, who had looked at her from the very first day with a seriousness she'd read as respect, and which might have been something else entirely. Maybe it was simply the way certain men are, unable to know what they want until someone stronger decides for them. That someone was Doña Amparo. Gerardo's mother was the kind of woman who never needed to raise her voice to be obeyed. A look was enough. A silence dropped into the right conversation was enough. A word here, another there, planted the way a farmer plants a field. So quietly that no one ever saw the sowing. From the beginning, she had regarded Isabella with the suspicion of a woman who wants no wife for her son except the one she would have chosen herself. She's pretty, but she has no trade, she told Gerardo in private the first time. Her family has nothing, she said later. They say she only wants your name, she said later still. And so, brick by brick, with the patience of someone building a wall the other person never notices going up, Doña Amparo raised between Gerardo and Isabella something that started as doubt and slowly hardened into distance. Isabella didn't know it, or didn't want to know it. She had chosen to believe in what she saw when Gerardo was with her. Attention, care, the promise of a future she had painted in her mind with the colors people use before they learn the world can paint in other ones. The church was full when Isabella walked in on her father's arm. Dark wooden pews, the stone altar bright with candles, Father Francisco in his clean Sunday cassock, the women's choir that had rehearsed all the week before. Everything in place. Everything ready. Gerardo stood at the front with his back to her, in the dark suit that had cost him 3 weeks of overtime. Isabella walked the aisle with the measured step she'd been taught, feeling with every step the weight of the town's eyes on her. It wasn't vanity she felt. It was closer to the awareness that this was one of those moments that don't repeat, the kind that get carved into a community's memory and retold for generations. When she reached the altar and Gerardo turned to look at her, she saw something in his eyes she couldn't name in the moment. Something that wasn't the emotion she'd expected. Something closer to fear. Father Francisco began the ceremony and Gerardo leaned toward her and said something very quietly, so quietly only she could hear it, in the voice of someone reciting words another person wrote for him. Words he doesn't quite believe himself. He asked her to forgive him. He said he couldn't do it. He said his mother was right, that it wasn't a good match. He said he was sorry. Isabella went completely still for a second that seemed to have no end. Then she turned and walked out of the church. She would never remember clearly what happened in the minutes that followed. She would remember the midday sun hitting her face as she stepped through the church doors. The murmur rising behind her like a wave. A hand, her mother's, maybe, or the madrina's, reaching for her arm. She would remember shaking it off without turning around. She would remember the horse, the sexton's horse, a bay animal tied to the post outside, that looked at her with the calm indifference of an animal that understands nothing of weddings or humiliation. Isabella had ridden since she was a girl on her grandfather's ranch, and her body remembered what her mind, in that moment, could never have organized. She untied the rope, mounted, and rode out at a trot on the road leading north out of town. No one followed her, or if someone tried, they never caught up. The wedding dress filled with red dust from the road. The veil came loose somewhere on a curve, and she didn't stop for it. She just kept going. Her grandmother Consuelo's house lay 2 hours away up through the hills, a small adobe and tile property that had belonged to the maternal side of the family for generations, closed up since the old woman died the year before, waiting for someone to decide what to do with it. No one had decided yet because those decisions get postponed while the grief is still fresh and the things of the material world feel smaller than the things of the heart. Isabella had grown up spending seasons in that house. She knew every stone on the road, every curve among the pines, the spot where the creek crossed the path, and you had to bear north to keep your feet dry. She knew the smell of the place, old wood and dried herbs, the particular creak of the door, the way the light came through the back window at dusk. It was the one place in the world where no one knew her as the woman left at the altar, the one place where she was still just Isabella. She arrived as the sun was going down. The horse stopped on its own in front of the entrance, as if it too remembered the place. Isabella dismounted, tied the animal to the same post that was somehow still standing, though no one had used it in months, and pushed the door open. The wood gave with its familiar groan. Inside it smelled of closed-up time, of dust settled with patience, of the herbs her grandmother used to hang from the beams, dried now to almost nothing. Everything was exactly as it had been left. The table, the 2 chairs, the cold hearth, the wooden bed in the back room with its wool mattress folded on top. Isabella stepped in, shut the door behind her, and there, in the silence and dark of a house that still smelled like her dead grandmother, she sank to the dirt floor and cried. She cried in a way she never had before. Not the held-back crying of someone who knows they might be heard, but the other kind. The kind that only comes when a person is entirely alone and there's no longer any reason to hold it in. The kind that comes from somewhere much older than the pain itself, as if she weren't only crying for the morning, but for everything the morning had meant. She cried for Gerardo, who had been a coward exactly when courage was required. She cried for herself, for 2 years of waiting and faith placed in the wrong hands. She cried for the wedding dress full of dust and the veil lost on some curve of the road. She cried for the faces of the townspeople who had seen it all and would be talking about it for weeks. And she cried too, though she couldn't have explained why, for her grandmother Consuelo, for missing her, for wanting her there in that house, with her way of saying little and meaning much, with the hands that always knew what to do when Isabella's own hands found no way forward. When the crying finally emptied itself out, Isabella lay on the dirt floor with the crumpled dress beneath her, her eyes so swollen she could barely keep them open. Outside, full night had fallen. She had no strength left to get up, to light the lamp, to look for the mattress. She stayed there on the floor with the Chiapas night cold creeping down through the adobe walls, and without deciding to, without being able to help it, she fell asleep. The dream arrived all at once. The way dreams do when they aren't ordinary dreams. No fog, no confusion. Everything was clear with the particular clarity that belongs only to the place between sleep and waking, where the mind grows quiet enough to see what it otherwise can't. Isabella was standing in the field behind the house, the same field she knew by heart, the guava tree to the right, the stone wall at the far end. Except it was night. A full moon night that lit everything in a silver light that wasn't quite moonlight, but something more alive, more present. A woman knelt in the dirt beside the 3 large stones that had always sat in the far left corner of the field. The stones Isabella had used as a play table as a child, never knowing they'd been there far longer than anyone living could remember. The woman was old, her hair in long braids, her clothes belonging to no era Isabella could place, her hands buried in the earth as if searching for something, or setting something down. Isabella tried to speak to her but couldn't. In the dream, her voice wouldn't come, the way it often won't. The woman lifted her head and looked at her, and in that look there was something Isabella couldn't describe afterward, but felt clearly in the moment. Not a message, not a warning, but recognition, the kind that passes between people who share something beyond what can be named. The woman looked back down at the ground. She finished what she was doing. burying something, a round clay vessel that made a dull, heavy sound as the earth closed over it. Then she wiped her hands on her clothes, rose with the slowness of someone carrying many years, and walked toward the stone wall at the back of the field. Before she disappeared, she turned once more and pointed. Pointed at the 3 large stones. A clear gesture, unhurried. The kind someone makes when leaving instructions they know will be understood. Then she was gone. Isabella woke before dawn. The dirt floor beneath her was cold. The dark inside the house was total. For a moment she didn't know where she was or what had happened. That first disorientation before memory comes flooding back. Then it all returned. The church, Gerardo's words. The horse, the road, the crying. She sat up slowly, her body aching from the floor, and then she remembered the dream. She remembered it with a sharpness ordinary dreams don't have. The braided woman, the 3 stones, the buried vessel, the pointing hand. She sat still for a moment, turning it over. She thought about dismissing it. It was only a dream, after all, the product of a night of crying and exhaustion, and sleeping exposed on a dirt floor. But some part of her that wasn't quite reason, but older than reason, wouldn't let her let it go. She got up, felt her way to the oil lamp her grandmother always kept by the door. It was still there, the flint too. She lit the lamp with hands that hadn't fully woken up yet, and stepped out the back door into the field. Dawn hadn't broken yet, but the sky was already lightening in the east. Enough light to see by. The 3 stones sat exactly where they had always been, in the far left corner. Isabella walked to them, knelt in the dirt the way the woman in the dream had knelt, and began to dig with her hands. The ground was soft there, softer than the rest of the field, as if it had been turned at some point in the past and never fully settled again. She dug slowly, clearing the earth with care, not sure how deep to go, not sure there was anything to find at all. At about 30 centimeters, her fingers hit something hard. Isabella held her breath. She kept clearing the dirt, more carefully now, working the edges of whatever it was until its shape came clear in the thin light of dawn. It was a round clay vessel, about the size of a head, sealed at the mouth with a mix of wax and clay that time had hardened solid. She lifted it out with both hands. It was heavy. She stayed kneeling in the dirt with the vessel in her arms for a stretch of time she couldn't measure, her heart beating with something that wasn't quite fear and wasn't quite joy. Some mixture of the two that has no name of its own. She carried the vessel inside, found the smallest tool she could, a kitchen knife still hanging on the wall where it had always hung, and chipped away at the wax and clay seal, slowly, carefully, until it gave. Inside were coins. Silver, tarnished dark with age but whole, the kind that had circulated decades earlier, back in colonial times. And wrapped with care in a linen cloth gone yellow but not ruined, there was a letter, writing small and tight, hard to make out. It read, "For the one who comes after me when the world has not been kind to her. Let her know she is not alone. Let her know this family's blood sets something aside for her. Let her use it wisely, and remember where she comes from. With love, from the other side of time. Your great-great-grandmother, Esperanza." Isabella read the note 3 times, then folded it back with the same care it had been folded with originally, and tucked it into the one pocket her wedding dress had. The small inner pocket she'd had sewn in herself, because she was a practical woman, whatever anyone looking at her might have assumed. She sat at the table with the open vessel in front of her as the morning light crept through the window and filled the kitchen that still smelled like her grandmother. She thought about the woman in the dream. The long braids, the hands in the earth, the gesture toward the stones before she left. She thought about her great-great-grandmother Esperanza, a name she'd heard maybe 2 or 3 times in her whole life, mentioned in passing in some grown-up conversation, without detail, the way people mention someone who lived so long ago that almost no one is left to remember them clearly. She thought about what the note said. For the one who comes after me, when the world has not been kind to her. As if Esperanza had known, decades or maybe a century earlier, that there would be someone. That there would always be someone. And she thought about Doña Amparo, about Gerardo, about the altar, the dust on the road, the dress, and for the first time since the morning before, she felt something that wasn't quite relief, but was close to it. The sense that what had felt like the end of something was really the beginning of something else. That the humiliation of that morning, as real and as painful as it had been, wasn't the last chapter of her story. Only a bend in the road, that someone, long before she was even born, had already been thinking of her. In the days that followed, Isabella didn't go back to town. Not yet. First, there were things to understand and things to decide. And for that, she needed the silence of that house and the distance of that hillside. She cleaned the place from top to bottom with the kind of energy the body produces once the mind finally finds solid ground. She opened the windows to let the stale air out and the mountain air in. She lit the hearth for the first time in months and made something to eat with what little the pantry held. Some dried beans, a bit of corn, herbs from the garden that had somehow survived on their own. She counted the coins. There were far more than she'd expected. Enough to live carefully for months, maybe longer. Enough to do something with the house, to repair what needed repairing, to buy seed, to work the land. It wasn't a fortune, not in the way people usually mean that word. It was the difference between being able to choose and not being able to choose. And that difference, Isabella came to understand that week, is the only one that really matters. Doña Amparo sent word on the third day. A boy from town arrived with a letter bearing the Villanueva family's wax seal. Isabella took it, read it, folded it, and put it away without answering. The letter said, with the cold elegance that was Doña Amparo's trademark, that what had happened was unfortunate but necessary. That she hoped Isabella would understand that difficult decisions are made for the greater good. And that if Isabella needed help re-establishing herself in town, the family would be willing to put in a good word with certain families they knew. It was the kind of generosity that is really control. A hand extended just to see whether the other person takes it, so as to measure how much power remains. Isabella didn't take the hand. She sent the boy back with a short message. That she was fine, that she needed nothing, that she appreciated the gesture, and that she had things to attend to. The house slowly came back to life. Isabella patched the section of roof that had started to leak. She cleared the well. She brought back the herb garden her grandmother had tended so carefully and which, after a year of neglect, had survived better than she expected. Because good plants have that stubbornness particular to things planted with intention. She learned things town life had never required of her. She learned to milk the goat she found wandering, abandoned, on the neighboring land, and adopted without asking anyone's permission. She learned to preserve fruit from the orchard for the months when there would be none. She learned to speak less and work more. The kind of things a person learns only when they live alone long enough that silence stops being empty and starts being company. She spent the coins the way Esperanza's note had asked, with wisdom, buying only what was needed, never putting on more than she was, letting them last exactly long enough for the work to take over. And the work did take over. 6 months after arriving at her grandmother's house with a wedding dress full of road dust, Isabella's mother came to see her. Doña Refugio rode up alone one morning, unannounced, with the determination of a mother who has finally decided to do what she should have done long before. She stood at the entrance taking it all in. The house, the tidy garden, the orchard starting to bear fruit, the clean corridor with herbs hung to dry from the beams, exactly the way her own mother used to hang them. "I thought you'd be," she started and didn't finish the sentence. "Bad off," Isabella said. "Alone." "I'm alone," Isabella answered. That's not the same as bad off. Her mother came in, sat at the table, accepted the coffee she was offered. She looked at her daughter with the mix of guilt and relief that mothers feel when they discover the child they failed to protect ended up protecting herself. "Gerardo got married," she said finally, quietly, as if it might still hurt. Isabella thought a moment before answering. "I hope he's happy," she said, and she meant it. Without effort, because in those 6 months, she had learned that resentment weighs more on the one who carries it than on anyone else. And that setting it down isn't weakness. It's hygiene. Her mother looked at her for a long moment. "What are you going to do out here?" she asked. "Live," Isabella said. "What is there to do anywhere?" What Isabella built in that house wasn't grand, not in the way the world usually measures grandness. It wasn't an estate. It wasn't a visible fortune. It wasn't the kind of story told loudly in the town square. It was something closer to what her great-great-grandmother Esperanza had built, whoever she'd been, whenever she'd lived, the day she buried those coins in the ground beside the 3 stones. Thinking of someone who hadn't been born yet. A life of her own. A life where no one else made the decisions. A life where the worth of things wasn't set by other people, but by the work of her hands, and the clarity of her own mind. The town talked less as time went on, the way towns do when novelty turns into scenery, and yesterday's scandal becomes today's routine. Some of the women started visiting, for the medicinal herbs at first, and later for other reasons that had less to do with remedies and more to do with the way Isabella listened. She received them on the corridor with coffee ready, the way she'd learned from her grandmother Consuelo, and the way she'd learned, too, from Esperanza's note, that a family's love doesn't always pass hand to hand. Sometimes it gets buried and waits, patient and still beneath the ground, until the right person comes along and knows where to dig. The clay vessel stayed in the house, empty of coins now, but not of meaning. Isabella had cleaned it and set it on the shelf by the window that looked out over the field, where the 3 stones were visible if you looked in the right direction. Sometimes at dusk, when the light slanted low and the field turned that particular gold that only exists in Chiapas at certain hours, Isabella would look at the stones and think of Esperanza, of what she had set aside, of what she must have imagined, of the faith it must have taken, in an age with no telegraph and no reliable post, to believe that something she left behind would reach the person who needed it. And it had reached her, in the darkest night of her life, in her dead grandmother's house, in a dream that wasn't quite a dream. Isabella never decided whether to call it a miracle, or memory, or simply the way love persists when it means to persist, past bodies, past years, past everything time carries off. She only knew it was real, and that she, in turn, would do the same. One day when the time came, she would bury something. Not necessarily coins, maybe just a note. Just a few words for the one who came after her when the world was unkind to her too. So she would know she wasn't alone. So she would know that blood keeps its promises.